Now that our player's health system is working, we need to hook it up to the UI and give them some sort of a health indicator, like a health bar or some hearts. Right now, the only way to see the health is to look in the inspector, and here you actually have to make the player data public to even see it. I can watch my health go down as I jump on things. Oh, and I gotta go reselect him. There we go, I can see my health there. Jump on things and watch it update. If you don't see it updating, just make sure you go reselect your player object. But that, again, only shows up if I make my player data public, and using the inspector or the editor like that is obviously not what we want to do. Instead, I'm going to remove that public keyword that I just temporarily added. We'll watch this turn gray and disappear so we can't see the player data. And then we're going to modify our UI, our player canvas, and our player panels specifically to give ourselves the ability to have health bars on here. So let's start by going to our player canvas. We're going to open up that prefab. I'm just going to hit the arrow right here to open the prefab in context and go to the scene view. Now I should just see the prefab edit mode. I can zoom in and out with my mouse wheel, and again, that left mouse button to pan around. And the first thing I want to do is update this player panel. This player panel 1, I want to make it 4 times the size, so twice as tall, twice as wide, and then give it some room for health bars or for health hearts. First, I'll switch out of debug mode on my inspector into normal mode, choosing the little hamburger menu or the 3 dots there, and then we'll modify the size. I'll set this to 200 by 200. So just type in a 200 tab and 200. Go select the score text, and this one I only want to cover like the top 75 pixels or so. So I'm going to set the bottom here to what is going to be like a 125. So that way I've got 125 below it. And now you can see I've got my number up here. And if I go to the game view, well, you can't see anything because it's in context in the prefab edit mode. But you can see right here about the size that I've got. So I've got 75 pixels for the top and 125 to spare for the bottom. Now I'm going to go to the panel, right click on it and choose UI, and we'll create another panel that's going to be this bottom panel. Here we'll set the top to 75 so that it covers the bottom except for the top 75 pixels. This is the offset from the top, assuming that it's filling out and stretching everywhere. And then I'm going to disable the image because I don't want a background image for this part. Underneath this panel, I'm going to right click and choose UI and image, and we're going to add a heart. So once I've got the image here, I'll name it heart, and I'll name it heart_1. And we're going to use that name specifically because you'll see why in just a moment. And then go to the source image, and we're going to search, and we're going to find the heart. This should be included with the assets that we got, and I'll just take the full heart right here. Now I'm going to go up to this panel, and we're going to add a new component to it. What I want is multiple hearts to appear in a grid, either a 3x2 grid or a 4x2 grid or 2x2, whatever size it is you end up deciding you want to go with. But I'm going to go with, I think I'll do a 3x2 grid. So to do that with the panel selected, well, first let's rename this panel to hearts. And then with the hearts object selected, we'll hit add component and add a grid. Just search for grid and find not grid itself though, grid layout group. Look for this one right here, grid layout group, and add that component. We'll change the cell size to thinking 66 by 66. So that's 200 divided by 3, like 66.66, right around there. Give us the right width. And then I want the height to match so that I keep the right ratio. I don't want this to be like 100 tall and stretch out or anything. I want it to match. So change that back to a 66 by 66. Then I'm going to go to this heart and I'm going to duplicate it. Now the first thing I want to notice, if I duplicate it right now, the name gets kind of weird. It's heart_1 and parentheses 1. I'm going to delete this heart and we're going to go into our options or preferences. We'll go to edit and go to, I believe it's under project settings. And then we need to look for, let's just search for duplicate. Let's see if it shows us our text. Nope. Let's see. I think it's under editor. We'll find it right here. We'll find the option right here under editor in project settings. You'll see the game object naming, and it's got prefab and then the parentheses and 1. You can choose a couple options. There's prefab.1 or prefab_1, and we're going to go with the _1. If you prefer dots, go ahead and use dots. It doesn't matter. I just don't like using the parentheses because it ends up being a mess. So here I've changed it to 1. _1. I'm going to close that window, go to File, and Save Project, which is going to update my project settings. If I go to Plastic SCM, you just see that now my editor settings and project I think it was the project settings specifically, they got updated for that. Now let's go back to our heart. So I'm going to go select my heart, and I'm going to duplicate it with Control D again. Now I've got a heart 2, a heart 3, one more time. Keep doing it, Control D, Control D, Control D. I've got all of my hearts lined up here. I've got a nice row of 6 hearts, which is just about what I want. Now I need to do this for my other player panel as well, player panel 2. But I don't want to recreate all of this work and have it become a mess and possibly mess up one and have to do this work multiple times. If I go to 3 or 4 players, I don't want to have to do it over and over either. So what we're going to do is create a nested prefab. Now that we have our hearts created here, what we can do is create a prefab out of our player panel and then have our player canvas use multiple of that prefab. So that way we don't have to modify both of these panels, we just have to do the one. Now to do that, we're going to go to the prefabs folder here. We'll take the player panel 1, and I'm just going to click it and drag it in to turn it into a prefab. Now it'll become a prefab. You'll see that it's turned to blue and it shows up down here. I'll rename the prefab instead of it being player panel 1 to just be player panel. We'll still leave this one here as player panel 1 because this is the one for player number 1. Then we'll go to player panel 2, select it, just left click and then right click on it and find the prefab menu and hit replace. Now we'll choose the player panel. And check that out, we now have a panel that's here, but it looks a little bit weird. And the reason it looks a little bit weird is that right now we are overriding the width and the height. If I go to overrides, you can't really see it there. It's actually not really overriding, it's kind of at the one level up. So what we need to do is select the width, put in a 200, select the height, put in a 200, and ta-da, everything is fixed. So now you can see we've got both of our player panels. I'll rename this one to player panel 2 since it's for our second player. And then we'll save off our player canvas by going back, hitting save, and then let's go back into game view. And we should see both of these. Let's just press play and make sure that the coins are still working and we've got both of the UI elements there before we start worrying about code. So we've got it here. I can run around. I can still go grab some coins. Watch my UI update, and my health bars should not update yet when I go over here, but I should still be able to die. So there we go. I'm still taking damage. No updates yet because we haven't hooked up the code, but we do have these panels here and we have our nested prefabs. Let's take a look at those prefabs one more time. So if I go into my level, you can see I've got my player canvas here. If I select it, I can see the prefab data on it. It's referencing this player canvas prefab, and I can go select it by hitting the select button and finding that canvas. If I select one of these panels underneath it though, these are referencing the prefab that's the player panel prefab instead of the player canvas. They're children of the player canvas because now we're using the nested prefabs. And you hear about nested prefabs, which you'll probably hear about a lot with Unity. Just remember that they're essentially a prefab that's reused underneath another prefab, and almost or most of the time, not all, I'd say almost always in the experience that I have, they end up being UI related type things. Occasionally you'll have some nested prefabs with characters, but most of the time they end up being UI related because it just makes a lot of sense with UIs because you're creating these components and those prefabs are getting put in as components of other bigger components and you're building up these systems. So now that we've got our nested prefabs, I want to go into Plastic SEM and just go commit our changes really quick. I can see though that my player is showing here has changed, so I'm going to right click on it and hit diff just to make sure because I don't think I changed anything in it. Let's scroll through. It says the files are identical up here, so it looks like I didn't actually change anything. I must have just opened and modified the file accidentally. So I'll just hit right click on that one specific file, player, and hit undo changes. And then I'll check in my changes that we added, nested player panel prefabs.